Hey, what's up, everybody? Yeah, I just want to do a quick video of the tax brackets and standard deduction and everything since the new tax bill was voted into law over the weekend. People might have some questions, might be a little confused about how the tax brackets work and would they have been paying more or less if they let it expire. Well, anyways, so let's dive into it a little bit. So anyways, what is the standard deduction? So the standard deduction was raised to $15,000. So even though they renewed this tax bill before it expired, the standard deduction was raised. So it's up to $15,000 now. And what that means is, and why I made this graph is because I wanted to demonstrate that the standard deduction, you are taxed at 0%. Now, what a standard deduction is it's a standard. You know, it's everybody's eligible for it when you file your income tax return, and you don't have to itemize. You don't have to save receipts for it. Everybody gets it. And again, your first $15,000 of income, the federal income tax rate is 0%. Now, if they let it expire and you let it go back to the old tax brackets and tax code, the standard deduction would have went back down to $83.50. So that means your first $88,350 would have been 0% over here, but at $8,351, you would have started getting taxed at 10% over here. Whereas that doesn't kick in until $15,001 with the bill that they signed into law over the weekend. So let me break down how taxation works, because some people seem to be confused about that. So this might help you out a little bit. Now, for the sake of math, let's keep it easy. Let's say you make $25,000, right? So what that means is you're not going to pay 10% on all $25,000. What that means is with the standard deduction, right, 0%, 1501 to 25,000, you're going to get taxed at 10%. So at the end of the year, you should have paid in federal income taxes $1,000. 10% of 10,000 is 1,000, right? So if you had taxes taken out of your paycheck every single week, and at the end of the year you paid more than $1,000, you're going to get a return come income tax time. So that's how that works. So now when you compare that, this tax bill that was renewed over the weekend, to what would have been if they let it expire. Now, there's a lot of talk in the media, you know, about which bill's better, this and that. Anyways, so just wanted to do a side-by-side comparison so you can sift through the data, sift through the noise, and make a judgment for yourself. So over here, like I said, if they let it expire, it would have went back down to $83.50. So what that means is, if you took the standard deduction, you would have been taxed at 0% for less time than the bill that they just passed. So at $25,000, you would have been paying 10% for this approximately $12,000 right here. So right there alone, 10% of 12,000, $1,200. So at 20,550, you're already paying more in taxes than you would have been at 25,000 under the bill that they just passed over the weekend. Not only that, at 20,551, that doesn't even include, you know, it goes up to 15%. So you would have been paying a little bit more over here if you made $25,000. All right, let's look at some more numbers. Let's say you make $40,000. Which bill do you think you pay less in taxes? $40,000. You're in the 12% tax bracket over here. Not only that, 10% for longer, 0% for longer. All right. Over here, you're at 15%. And again, we already went over, you're paying 10% sooner and 0% for less. So there's no doubt in my mind, numbers don't lie. I'm not going to bust out the calculator, but at $40,000 a year, you're going to be paying more under this bill if they would have let it expire. Actually, if you look at the graph, numbers don't lie. up to this right here, $212,300, there is no question that if you're a single filer, because that's where these thresholds come from, is for single filers. But 212,300, there is no question that if you're a single filer and you took the standard deduction, that you would be paying less in taxes under this bill that renewed over the weekend than this bill over here on the right. $212,000. So that's middle class, lower middle class, the poor, everybody. All right, up to $200,000. Now, that is just looking at the tax bill. As far as tax credits and everything else, that varies a little bit, between administrations. But just looking at the tax brackets and the thresholds themselves, again, single filer, for joint filers and head of household, it does change a little bit. So I'll leave some links down below so you can check out the data for yourself. But anyways, for comparison purposes, this is what we got. Now, what if you make $250,000? Now, if you look up this, when you look up tax brackets online, they're going to compare, side by side, bracket 1 versus tax bracket 2 compared to 2. Now, when you do that, this tax code on the left, and I think it's safe to say this is the Republican tax bill and this is the Democrat tax bill. Now, not to get political, but the Democrats did vote unanimously against this tax bill over here. Every single one of them voted against it. So that's why I think it's safe to say that this is the Republican one, and over here this is the Democrat one. This one over here on the left that was renewed over the weekend was created during Trump's first administration back in 2017, and it was just renewed. But again, they upped the standard deductions, which, even though the percentages, the brackets, the amount stayed the same, the thresholds moved a little bit. So, where were we? Now, again, they would compare. Now, when you do that, back to that, the brackets, 12%, 15%, 22%, 25%, 32%, 33%, 35, 35, 37, 39.6. Now, when you do that side-by-side comparison, the ones on the left over here, every single one of them is less than the one on the right, with the exception of the 35 to 35. However, if you look at the thresholds, right, some of these kick in a little sooner than the ones on the right. So, for example, if you make $250,000, that puts you in this tax bracket, 32%. However, if you make $250,000, if they would have let it expire, you would still only be in the 28% tax bracket. So that's why, without crunching numbers, I think you can absolutely say, without crunching numbers, just looking at the graphs, under $212,000, standard deduction, single filer, there is no doubt you pay less in taxes with the Republican tax bill. Now, when you start getting into this tax bracket at 212,301, now you're at 32 to 28, because you're still in this tax bracket over here. So starts to get, now you got crunch numbers, and it would be interesting because even though you're now in this tax bracket, 32 to 28, going up to that, you pay less on the Republican tax bill than on the right. Now let's say $400,000, right? You're going to be taxed at 35%, starting at $265,526, right? That's with the Republican bill. Now $400,000 over here, if they would have let it expire, you're paying 33%. So you're paying 2% less. But does that offset, all these other brackets where you're paying more? That would be interesting to crunch those numbers and take a look at. So I might do a follow-up video and get back to you guys. Something to think about. But again, this is just a relatively quick comparison. Now, you always hearing about, oh, this Republican bill, it only benefits the ultra wealthy. Well, let's look at the highest tax bracket, 37 to 39.6. So, all right, they can absolutely make the claim that it benefits the ultra wealthy. It's 2.6% lower, and it kicks in later at 600. It doesn't kick in until 641,000. So if you make 600,000, right? You're still only paying 35%. Or if you make 600,000 over here, you're paying 4.6% more. So they can absolutely make that claim. That's an accurate claim. Now you also have to consider the ultra wealthy. I'm sure they have a lot of assets and a lot of write-offs, and that varies from administration to administration as well. Something to think about. They're not taking the standard deduction, but typically. So, you'd have to crunch some numbers. But my point is, anyways, I just wanted to update you guys on mainly what the tax brackets are and how standard deductions and taxation works. But also, sift through the noise, look at the data for yourself. Like I said, under $200,000, you absolutely pay less in taxes. So to say that it only benefits the ultra wealthy, that's not accurate. You're benefiting the middle class, the lower middle class, basically anybody who works, and they make less than $200,000. You're paying less in taxes over here with the Republican bill. Again, these two brackets, even though they're higher for, you could call them the rich or the upper middle class, over $212,000 a year. I mean, you still probably have to work for a living, but you shouldn't be hurting making that kind of money. But, it'd be interesting to see who actually do these people in these brackets, who pays less. That would be interesting. So I might crunch some numbers and get back to you guys. But anyways, so that's the data. Hope you found that interesting. Hope it clarifies a few things. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. I always enjoy nerding it up, talking economics and crunching numbers. But again, for those of you who are looking to buy a home next couple years, it helps to know the tax brackets and again how standard deductions work, especially with all these other deductions with no tax on overtime and no car loan interest. So it's good to know how deductions and everything work. So I hope this helped you guys out. And thanks for watching.